So good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order the City of Lake Forest Park City Council regular meeting for Thursday, January 11th, 2024. And with that, I will ask Mr. Furtani to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, Council Member.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's an honor. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Furtani. Appreciate that very much. And before we get started, I want to take a moment to welcome our two new council members, Councilmember Good and Councilmember Saunders, as well as a returning Councilmember Bodie. And we have, of course, Councilmember Riddle, Councilmember Furtani, and Councilmember Goldman. Thank you all for your service. And Mr. Lebo down here. Sorry, I'm looking wrong. We moved seats around. I apologize, everyone. You can't see it on the screen, but musical chairs up here. And I have to say, I am really, really optimistic about 2024. I thank you all for being willing to serve your community. We have a lot of things to be supporting this community with, and I know that with the excellent help of our staff, we have many new staff members, including a new staff member who's in the room today, who we will introduce at some point here. We're going to have a very successful year. So with that, let's hit the ground running. Do I hear a motion for adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Does anybody, Councilmember Riddle?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to add an amendment to the governance manual to whichever section that is. I'll look at here to section, I think 9, council discussion and action. You've received it in the email and you have a printed copy of it in front of you.
Councilmember Riddle has moved to add to section 9, council discussion or action, an amendment to the governance manual. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any? Thank you, Councilmember Bodie. I'll wait for a second. There's a little electronic lag there. Are there any nays? The ayes have it. Thank you, Councilmember. And going back to the main motion, is there any further discussion on moving on the agenda as amended? Hearing none, all those in favor of the agenda as amended, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any nays? The ayes have it. Passes unanimously. Thank you, colleagues. And with that, we're moving on here. Let me back up a page. Councilmember Bodie, I want to ensure that you can hear us okay.
I can hear you very well. Thank you.
My pleasure. And we're going to start with item 4, council organizational meeting. And first we have the adoption of the city governance manual as just a gentle reminder and maybe for the first time, some folks are hearing this. As part of our governance manual, we have our council rules, which are required for us to be adopted by state statute before we can take action on other items. I would entertain a motion to adopt the city council governance manual.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any nays? The ayes have it. The adoption of the city governance manual passes unanimously. Thank you very much, colleagues. And now we're moving on to election of the deputy mayor and vice chair. And just for procedural clarity, I will be running the election of the deputy mayor. And after the deputy mayor is elected, the election of the council vice chair will be handed over to the deputy mayor. The same procedure will be utilized for both the election of the deputy mayor and the council vice chair. So I will just go ahead and read the procedure here. The mayor will call for nominations for the position of deputy mayor. Each council member may nominate one person, including him or herself at this time. Once all the nominations are made, the mayor will close the nominations and will allow time for discussion. Each council member will be allowed to speak once to make their case for a particular nominee. After each council member has had a chance to speak, the mayor will close the discussion and begin the voting process. If there's a singular nomination, the vote will be considered by unanimous consent. If there are multiple nominations, the vote will be taken. Each member of the council will vote for the preferred nominee. Votes will be taken in order of nomination received. The voting rounds will continue until a majority of 4 votes has tallied in favor of a nominee. A nominee may withdraw their nomination before a new round of voting begins. The council member who received the most votes will immediately assume the role of deputy mayor. I will hand the gavel to them and they can continue on with the other elections of the council leadership. Are there any questions about the procedures, folks? This is something that it's fairly perfunctory, but we go there. Okay. With that, I would like to open the nominations for the position of deputy mayor. Councilmember Furutani.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and it's my distinct pleasure to nominate Councilmember Lori Bodie for the position of deputy mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there any other nominations? Okay. Colleagues, I want to make sure that I'm not missing anybody's hands. Okay. Okay, I will, at this time, we'll close the nominations and we will allow time for discussion. There is a singular candidate. So Councilmember Bodie, would you like to speak to your candidacy?
I would, thank you very much. I would be honored and appreciate the opportunity to serve as deputy mayor. I've been on council for 1 whole term. This will be the beginning of my 2nd term. I believe that I am in a position to understand the workings of the council and also to facilitate the interaction between the council, the mayor, and the staff. For those of you who don't know, I'm an environmental lawyer. I also have been director of a conservation group nonprofit, and then also a federal senior executive in charge of a large environmental program. Right now, this is my primary position, other than being retired. So I would welcome the opportunity. I would be privileged to be deputy mayor, and I think it will be kind of fun in the year ahead. Challenging, but fun in the year ahead.
Thank you, Councilmember Bodie. Mr. Furutani.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm supporting Councilmember Bodie for deputy mayor because I think her experience in both the state and federal levels is invaluable for our being able to lobby our legislators effectively to get more resources for the city to complete what much needed projects. And given the dearth of other local funding sources, I think having a strong voice advocating for us at those levels is going to be crucial. So I'd love to see her on the leadership team.
Thank you. Colleagues, any other speaking to the motion? Comments on the motion? Well, with that, everyone, because there was a singular nomination, the Councilmember Bodie is elected deputy mayor by unanimous consent. Congratulations, Deputy Mayor Bodie.
Thank you so much. And I guess I will take the virtual gavel.
There you go.
Thank you. And once again, I'm honored by you, my colleagues, for this opportunity to serve the city and to represent you and your interests. With that, I will call for nominations for the council vice chair.
I will assist in the hands since Councilmember Bodie is.
Thank you so much. I only see
my pleasure. It's hard with the
part
camera.
of the council. Thank you.
Councilmember Saunders.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to nominate Councilmember Furutani as vice chair.
Are there any other nominations?
Councilmember Riddle.
I would like to nominate myself for vice chair.
Are there any other nominations?
Not seeing any.
Hearing none, I will close the nominations and begin the discussion. Council members, would you like to comment or discuss? Or let's start with this. Councilmember Fortani, would you like to speak to your candidacy and your interest in being vice chair of the council?
Well, thank you, Deputy Mayor, and I would love to. I've been serving for 2 years, my first term in the office, and I'm really concerned about the fiscal state of this city because of the fact that we, as I mentioned, we have a dearth of local funding sources, and it's looking more and more like we need to actually look outside and get grants, get other kinds of funding to complete the desperately needed projects that we have. I've been thinking about our own roundabout project, which every time we have a delay costs us a few $100,000s more. And so we're not going to be able to mount that hill without getting some significant help. And I really want to be a voice for the whole community, trying to get basically these resources so we can complete these needed projects. So that's the reason I want to be deputy mayor, or not deputy mayor, you're deputy mayor. Yeah, I want to be vice chair, council vice chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Fortani. And now Councilmember Riddle, please speak to your candidacy.
Thank you. Over my last 7.5 years here on council, I think I've demonstrated that I am committed to the work that we do. I'm focused on transparency and I represent all of the LFP community. In the last 3 years being a chair on the statewide advisory council and 5 years on Health Here, now as their board president, I think I have the experience here to be on leadership. I am familiar with agenda setting meetings, legislative agenda setting, how to chair meetings, managing different personalities, approaching concerns and issues with openness and compassion. I show up, even with my other responsibilities, to every meeting, having only missed one last year. While I do seem to have a lot going on, I am a mom, I am a full-time employed. I do show up, I am consistently here. I have the time and I am committed to this job. And I have in fact committed to fewer other responsibilities this year as well. My goals for this year are fairly simple. As much as we do need to work on individual projects, I'm focusing more on what it would look like having the comp plan coming out of Planning Commission. We have a deadline at the end of the year for that. It's going to take a lot of work for us to make sure that that comp plan update is what the council wants. And I think that's going to take a lot of the year to go through. Second, I want our city to be financially stable, but more so on a regular basis and not relying on one-time funds. I think we need to bring something to our community, but that will require a significant education program. And it will require ample public outreach to ensure that we ask of our community, what do they want to focus any new funding on? And I think that education and public outreach is likely to take more than a year. So I think getting that foundation set this year so that if we do decide to have an ask, that happens next year. I think that's going to set us up to not only help us with this biennium, but the bienniums in the future. So our 6-year outlook doesn't dip below reserves. Also, transparency. I believe in being a servant leader. I believe that my role on leadership would be supporting the needs of this council rather than pushing a personal agenda. For example, I would like to see cows that would let anyone bring up an idea at the end of the cow so that you have access to all of your council members to determine whether they want to support you. Because if you happen to talk to 2 council members and they don't support you, now we've hit OPMA and your idea might die. And I think that having that transparency gives us more opportunity for good ideas. And not only good ideas, but good ideas that the whole council can get behind quickly. So in summary, I believe in fairness, good policy, doing things right the first time as best as we can, standing behind our decisions and stewarding our decisions in a direction that limit liability on the city, that are equitable and will stand up against challenge. And for those reasons, I think I'm uniquely qualified to be vice chair in the event that Deputy Mayor Bodie is unable to attend a meeting or chair this council.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you.
Please.
Yes, thank you very much, Councilmember Riddle. Now we will go to the vote for each of the two candidates, starting with Councilmember Fortani. Mr. Mayor, if you would help me, since I can't see the whole table at any one time, or assess exactly who says yes. So all those in favor of Councilmember Fortani for Vice Chair of the Council, please say aye and raise your hand so that Mr. Mayor can see who is voting aye.
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 1, 2, 3. We have 4 ayes.
So, and now turning to Councilmember Riddle. All those in favor of Councilmember Riddle as Vice Chair, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We have 2 votes, Deputy Mayor.
I am abstaining from both votes. So as new deputy mayor, I've decided to just hold my vote from this session. So at this point, Councilmember Fortani is elected by vote of the council to be vice chair of our council.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Councilmember Fortani. Councilmember Fortani, I'm asking you as your first official act to take over chairing this meeting since I'm remote and it's slightly awkward for me to call for the votes and call on people because I am remote and can't see the full council. And we do have a very full agenda. So I'm hoping that you will agree to do that.
That would be my honor, Deputy Mayor.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, colleagues. I think we have a wonderful year ahead. And I'm confident that working together as a council, working with the mayor and working with the staff, including our new staff members, we're going to have a challenging and promising year.
Please, Vice Chair
Thank you.
Bertoni.
Okay, moving forward in the agenda, we have item 5, or well, we still have to do the appointment of committee.
That's what we're talking
chairs.
about, and then I'll take back over. Okay, yep. No, you're doing
Oh,
committee
I'm
chairs.
doing the chairs. Okay, thank you.
Committee chair and vice chair
Okay.
for,
May I borrow that?
yeah,
Sure.
you're looking for the,
The procedure.
yeah, the procedure's right here. It's gonna be the same.
Got it. Okay. All right, so we're gonna open the nominations for the committee chair, specifically the Budget and Finance Committee. And so I'll be opening the floor for nominations. Okay, I saw Councilmember Lebo, then Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bertoni. I'd like to nominate myself, John Lebo, as Chair of the Budget Committee. I'll just stop there.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Riddle.
I would like to nominate myself for chair of the Budget Committee.
All right, thank you. All right, so starting with council, are there any other nominations? Okay, so I'd like to invite Councilmember Lebo to speak on his nomination.
So I'd be honored to serve for the council members as the Chair of the Budget Committee. I have been on the Budget Committee for the last 2 years. My background of over 30 years has been in capital projects where I've been responsible for significant budgets in governmental settings, very similar to that which we see here at the City of Lake Forest Park. I view my role as chair as really being a facilitator for the members of the City Council who are always welcome at budget meetings. So I would be honored to serve as your chair for the Budget Committee.
All right, thank you so much. Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you. Having been on Budget and Finance for 6 years, I believe, in the role of vice chair this last 2 years. I feel that I bring a much more specific LFP sort of perspective to how we run our budgets. I think I understand more what it's going to take, for instance, to do a levy lid lift. If that's what the community wants, I feel that I'm better in a role to be guiding us through that. I suppose that's all I have to say at the moment.
All right, thank you so much. Would anybody anybody else on the council like to speak on behalf of either of the candidates? Okay, so seeing none, we'll move on to the vote. So we'll start with, in order, Councilmember Lebo. Would all those who would like to see Councilmember Lebo as the Budget and Finance Chair, please raise your hand and say aye so that I can count the votes.
Aye.
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 All right, so I see 3 votes for Councilmember Lebo. All right, now for Councilmember Riddle.
4.
Oh, 4, sorry.
Of course, it's okay.
Okay, 4 votes. Please correct the record. Okay, for Councilmember Riddle, I'd like to see all votes, please say.
I don't think you need to,
Okay.
as he has reached the 4 vote
Okay.
threshold. Yes.
Fair enough. Thank you. All right, so congratulations, Councilmember Lebo. You are the Budget and Finance Chair.
Congratulations.
Vice Chair, back to you, right? All right, so moving on to item 5, proclamations.
No. You're going to the vice chair.
Yeah, too.
Oh, for the
Vice chair, yeah, you're acting in deputy mayor.
Okay, we're not
Cody's
really
dead.
making this up. Okay, so now I'm going to ask for nominations for the vice chair of the Budget and Finance Committee. Sorry about that.
You're fine.
Councilmember Riddle.
I nominate myself for vice chair.
Any other nominations? All right, seeing none, would you like to speak on your behalf?
Same comments as I had as chair.
Fair enough. All right, so. Oh, right, if there's a singular nomination, the vote will be considered unanimous consent. So seeing no other nominations, congratulations, you are the vice chair of the Budget and Finance Committee.
Congratulations. Right, with that, I will take the gavel back and we'll close the council organizational meeting. Thank you, everybody.
There's a third member of the Budget and Finance Committee. Do we want to assign that member?
Oh,
at
yes,
this point?
certainly, yes, go right ahead. You can, okay, you can go ahead and do that.
All right, we need to have 3 members on the Budget and Finance Committee. So would anybody like to serve on the Budget and Finance Committee? So I see Councilmember Good. Is there anybody else? All right, so by unanimous consent, Councilmember Good, you are a member of the Budget and Finance Committee. Thank you for serving.
Thank you. You technically don't have to vote. You don't have to vote on that. It's an appointment
It's an
that you make
appointment,
as a
right.
group, but thank you. Thank you, everybody, and congratulations to council leadership. I am very excited about working with you all, as I know the staff will be, and the administration in your new leadership roles. And that means that for the council, the deputy mayor, as well as the council vice chair, we will begin our agenda meetings next week. Generally, we meet at 3 p.m. on Tuesdays, but it's a new year and new group. So Mr. Hill and I are both quite flexible about scheduling, so we can try to sort it out. Mr. Goldman.
Yeah, that's as a point of order. At what point do we appoint members of the other various boards and commissions, liaisons, et cetera?
Actually, that's a great question. We did not actually have that on the agenda, did we? Thank you for that. I would suggest that we go ahead and would you like to make a motion to approve?
Would that be
the
better
group as listed?
handled as under council discussion? Since we have, I'll move that we add an item under item 9 in the agenda for approving members of city boards and commissions.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of adding item 9B to the agenda signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any nays? There are no nays. It passes unanimously. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Goldman, for that. I appreciate it. Okay, we are moving on to a proclamation, which I will go ahead and read. Whereas the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. has inspired this country and the world with his vision and dedication to freedom and equality. And whereas Martin Luther King Jr. became the voice of the American Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 1960s with eloquent speeches and nonviolent action that resulted in landmark legislation, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And whereas Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4th, 1968 at 39 years of age. And whereas the voice of Martin Luther King Jr. was not silenced, and his faith and courage in proclaiming the message of liberty and justice for all lives on. And whereas federal legislation signed into law on November 2nd, 1983 established a legal holiday to be celebrated on the third Monday in January, honoring the life of civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr., who was born on January 15th, 1929. Now, therefore, the mayor and the city council of the city of Lake Forest Park do hereby proclaim Monday, January 15th, 2024 as Martin Luther King Jr. Day in the city of Lake Forest Park. And I urge all citizens to join me in this special observance. Signed this 11th day of January, 2024. Okay, with that, we're on to public comments, and I will read our rules. And I will say to members of the community, beyond the rules, keep it civil and within the law, please. Here are the rules, and the public comment rules are as adopted by the council. This portion of the agenda is set aside for the public to address the council on items or any topic the council might have purview or control over. If the comments are of a nature that the council does not have influence or control over, then the mayor may request that the speaker suspend their comments. Council may direct staff to follow up on items brought up by the public. Comments are limited to a 3-minute limit. And I already see some folks that I've seen before who have made uncivil comments. So we'll start at the top. And as a friendly reminder, we will cut you off if it is not of the purview of this body, or if it is an offensive nature or of violence. First, we have Rex Uden.
I've lived in Lake Forest for about 14 years now. How are you guys doing tonight? Okay. Well, I would like to say, first of all, I'm opposed to the Martin Luther King Day. He plagiarized his doctorate and had a Jewish man write all of his speeches, and I just don't see what's so important about him.
We're going to move on to Alex Weaver. I'm sorry for members of the public that have to endure hateful speech.
Yes, good evening, council. My name is Alex Weaver. Am I coming through all right?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. I just wanted confirmation. I would like to ask the city council if they've had any recent negotiations or any contact with the local law enforcement agencies in regards to the tunnels underneath the local synagogue where they rape and murder children, drink their blood.
Cut him off. This is not the purview of this body. Somebody could pop to the top again. I think we're on to Scott Mason.
Good evening, Council. I have been a proud resident here for about 14 years. I have a short speech prepared, which may sound shocking at first, but I promise I will get to my point. You will never be a real woman. You have no womb. You have no ovaries.
I think we've heard from. Just for the record, we don't have any members of the public that has signed up in person for comment. Once again, I apologize for the unseemly behavior of some members out there in the world. Mr. Cooper, you are next.
Good evening, City Council. Nigger, 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 nigger.
And last but not least, we have Mitzi. Okay, I think we're going to close public comment unless no members. Yes, I think we're going to close public comment at this time unless there's members of the public in the house that would like to make some polite comments. I welcome the floor, give you the floor, Julian.
Well, just to keep the spirit of public comment alive. Have no prepared comments, just want to congratulate the new council on their positions and all the responsibilities you're taking on in addition to just a couple nights a week. So it's much appreciated and I look forward to collegiality and progress from this group. But since I have standing here, I'd make one comment on one action that you took tonight, which is the governance manual, which is pretty important, has a lot of detail in it. And one detail, which I always am interested in, which is often honored in the breach of it, and that is the 3-touch rule. I lost track as I listened to your last meeting, how many times you elected not to follow that provision of your governance manual. So I don't know what the solution is, and it may be about deadlines and all sorts of other things, but every time it's breached, I think it's too bad. Other than that, have fun.
Thank you, Julian. And with that, I will close public comment. Okay, thank you, everyone. And once again, I'll leave it there. With that, we are moving on to the consent calendar. And as our new council colleagues know, this is where we have items that are non-controversial and mostly of a perfunctory basis. At any time, a council member may request from the dais or in advance of a meeting to have an item from consent move to a general discussion. And with that, I'd entertain a motion for adoption of the consent calendar.
So moved.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Hill.
Mayor, we need to pull the 2 expenditures, if you remember.
Oh.
We have a little bit of an issue with deputy mayor now being the mayor was the budget and finance chair. Now that we have a budget and finance chair appointed, we would like to pull these 2 items, have the budget and finance chair come in and review those before they're brought back to council for approval.
Thank you, Administrator Hill. And just for everyone's edification, that was a bit of a head scratcher for us because I couldn't sign twice on both of the documents. And now we have a new budget chair. So John, I'm happy to work with you so you can review the documents and then I will be able to sign in my new capacity, not in my prior 2 capacities. So thank you for that. And thank you, Mr. Hill. With that understanding, we will be adopting consent calendar items A and B, signified by saying aye.
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 Are there any nays? The ayes have it. That passes. The consent calendar as amended, it passes unanimously. Then we move on to ordinances and resolution for action. Mr. Hill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Before you tonight is Resolution 24-1940. As we've discussed, staff has applied for and received a $50,000 grant to help us have further understanding of the middle housing components of our comprehensive plan update. As I have included in your packet, we worked with our consultants, SCJ and Leland, who is the sub-consultant to SCJ, to identify a scope of work and to give us a deeper dive on the housing. We also met with Commerce to make sure that the work being done here doesn't conflict with the work that was already tied up in the actual comprehensive plan update. And so there will be, when they're working with the Planning Commission on this now public engagement plan, we'll be analyzing House Bill 1110. There is a 75-25 alternative density requirement where we could opt out 25% of the parcels throughout the city as we look at things like steep slopes, critical areas, et cetera. Looking at House Bills 1110, 1337 with off-street parking development regulations for middle housing and ADUs. Then we'll be analyzing middle housing topologies and development feasibility. And then they would be helping us draft middle housing comprehensive plan policies and ultimately development regulations. We have 6 months after the adoption of the comprehensive plan in December of this year to adopt those development regulations, and their schedule that's included targets us within those 6 months after adoption of the comprehensive plan for, excuse me, for those regulations. So I stand for any questions you may have.
Council, questions for Mr. Hill? Mr. Furton?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Hill, for your report as always. I'm just wondering, recognizing the member of the public's comment earlier, why is action necessary now?
Oh, why am I asking for action on the first touch? A lot of this work is beginning. We're already somewhat into the housing, and it's better if all of that work can continue to move forward together. We'll bill those separately to Commerce, but just trying to keep everything tight and everything moving forward on the comprehensive plan update is something that we're doing as part of the comprehensive plan already. This is just a deeper dive, allows us to get more into the weeds on those bills and make sure that we do the right thing for the city.
Right, so may I do a follow-up?
Yes, please.
So thank you for your answer. And therefore, if we don't act on it, that will hold up at least part of that reimbursement process.
It wouldn't hold up the reimbursement, but it might delay some of the work that we need to get started on at this point in time.
All right, thank you.
Deputy Rapoti, I believe was next.
Yes, thank you very much. And City Administrator, and thank you for seeking out and obtaining this additional grant funding. Because as we all know, this issue of middle housing and increased density and transit related parking or not parking requirements that are coming our way. These are such important sensitive issues for our community and represent the opportunity to tailor something to the city of Lake Forest Park. So I see this as an administrative matter to add money to the grant funds we already have, but also important in order to allow us to do that tailoring that we very much want to do for the city of Lake Forest Park, because one size does not fit all on the middle housing or the transit-oriented development. So I, for one, would be willing to support waiving the three-touch rule, because I do think that it is, this is a more of a housekeeping matter and to our great advantage to get this extra funding.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think Councilmember
I
Riddle?
don't know which one of us had. Sure. So looking at your city administrator report, and there was a concern about fire department access through roads that had street parking. Is that a piece of this that could that be looked at under this contract? Like the safety of on-street parking and evaluating where it may not be safe?
I hadn't given that a lot of thought.
Okay.
I mean, one of the things, and we're gonna have to see how the current bills fall out. I think that we saw last year, there was a component where based for off-street parking requirements that allowed on-street parking, you couldn't require off-street parking unless the city went through and completed a study of an individual road. I don't know that we would address that here. And I'm a little out of my wheelhouse. I would have to do a little bit of research and get back to you on that.
Okay, I think it'd be great to be somewhat proactive about that so that we don't run into issues in the future.
Okay.
Councilmember Lebo.
Would you go back a moment, refresh me about the schedule that you had described with regard to the comprehensive plan and how that relates to this grant and when certain things have to be done?
So the comprehensive plan has to be adopted by December 31st of 2024. Within 6 months of adoption, we have to adopt middle housing development regulations into our zoning code. That is the last step of this portion of the grant. And within the grant document, you'll see the scope of work, and that identifies that timeline which has to be completed. So these all tie together to get us to that time next June.
Thank you. That clarifies for why deliverable number 6 is adoption of the middle housing development regulation amendment ordinances.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councilmember Riddle.
And then just a clarification, I believe these are typically reimbursement-based grants. So we would not be able to apply funds towards this grant until we approve this. Is that correct? they won't
Yeah,
take.
Commerce has actually been, because they've been so delayed in getting these grants to the cities, they have an effective date prior to.
Okay.
So we have been able to go back and bill against them. But as you know, we have very limited funds. We were scraping together funds to get this together. We got the 65,000 planning. It's called PUG, and don't ask me what PUG stands for. I can't. Planning update grant, maybe so, and then this 50,000, and then you remember we've also applied for the environmental side of that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm thinking this may not necessarily be worth suspending the three-touch rule for the first presentation, but maybe the second presentation would make more sense.
Colleagues, other questions for Mr. Hill? Councilmember Saunders, Councilmember Goldman? No? Councilmember Good? Questions? Okay, let's make sure I can lean forward and see everyone. Okay, thank you, Mr. Hill.
Thank you.
Colleagues, what is your pleasure on item number A, resolution 24-1940? Councilmember Furtoni.
I'd like to move resolution 24-1940 for approval.
Point of order.
We'd have to suspend our rules,
Thank you,
or
Mr.
you would,
Mayor.
see, this is what happens. You all would have to suspend your rules, excuse me, for my misspeaking. Would someone like to make a motion to that effect?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Lebo.
I will move to suspend the three-touch rule on this is resolution number 24-1940.
That's correct. Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Goldman.
Yes, thank you. I agree with the member of the public who said we do seem to waive the three-touch rule a lot. And I think long term, I'd like to see us maybe trim that down a bit. In this particular instance, this is a motion for us to take $50,000, and that feels not controversial at all and kind of a no-brainer. And so I'm okay with waiving the three-touch rule on this instance.
Thank you, Councilmember Goldman. Councilmember Riddle.
I think that given that this isn't preventing us from moving forward, it doesn't seem appropriate to not give ourselves the opportunity to think through this and make sure that this is a contract that we want to sign. As you know, considering we don't know about sort of where the safety aspect might be analyzed within this, I think it's worth waiting to our next meeting, since the recuperation period is backdated. It doesn't affect us not getting the money.
Thank you, Councilmember Furtoni, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yeah, given the fact that according to the fiscal note, we'd end up having to pay for the work anyway. And I would echo Councilmember Goldman's comment that if this is $50,000 the state is willing to give us to actually get this work done and we don't have to pay it, I'm very much in favor of saving our taxpayers a little bit of money on this. So if what Administrator Hill said about the fact that if we don't vote on it today, we'll be delaying some of the work that's being done. I'm willing, to overlook the fact that we're, as you say, overlooking the three-touch rule so often, and would hope that the city staff, and if I can mention that, if more things could be brought more timely to us, then we wouldn't have to waive the three-touch rule quite so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there any further comments? Councilmember Lebo.
May I ask the city administrator a question with regard to the requirements for this? So you had mentioned, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You had mentioned that we needed to develop and pass any ordinance related to the middle housing within 6 months of the comprehensive plan. Is that a requirement regardless of whether or not we take advantage of this grant?
It is.
It is, yeah.
So this is really a administrative issue that we're addressing to be reimbursed for costs that we would otherwise have to incur.
Correct.
Are there any conditions that are imposed upon us that would otherwise not be typical administrative requirements for refunding or reimbursing our expenses?
No, there are not.
Is this similar to any kinds of other grants that we've similarly approved in the past with regard to the Department of Commerce, that would otherwise limit us and because we've accepted a grant that we would not otherwise be required to adhere to.
This is almost identical, other than what it's paying for, to the $65,000 PUG grant that you approved towards the end of 2023.
Thank you.
I believe we have a trial attorney in our midst, Mr. Lebo.
It's about money.
If I could ask, City Administrator Hill, looking at the scope of work, a significant portion of Action 1 was planned to happen in 2023. Is that a reflection of where we're at already? Has that already been done? Or are we gonna have to move the scope of works up and about to match reality?
Are you referring to the public outreach? Sorry,
A scope of work,
sorry, I moved away from it.
page 104 in the packet, page 12 of the contract.
And which one were you looking at? I'm sorry.
Just in general, Action 1 starts in September 2023.
No, that has already begun.
Okay.
The public engagement portion for middle housing would be rolled into that at this point. And Councilmember Bodie or Deputy Mayor Bodie can correct me if I'm wrong. We have not completed the public engagement plan with the Planning Commission. I believe that's still in the works. No,
Okay.
that has
That's
begun.
correct. If I could address that briefly, which I was going to address in discussing the Planning Commission. There is so much work that the Planning Commission has underway and that our consultants are assisting them with that they're thinking of trying to get a rough draft of the comprehensive plan edits together and then do robust public engagement at that point. So that the timetable is very rapid because in part because the Planning Commission needs to give the council a lot of time to hear from the public and provide its own views on the document before it gets adopted. So this is a bit of a rapid speedway that we're on. If that helps answer your question. There will be both outreach at the Planning Commission stage and outreach at the council stage.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councilmember Riddle.
And just a follow-up question for Mr. Hill. We have more than $50,000 worth of effort to expend on this task. Is that correct?
So the $50,000, this is specific to the deep dive on those two bills and how they work together with the parking. We are spending more money than that on housing as part of the overall comprehensive plan update.
So this 50,000 would be just dedicated to looking at the two bills essentially?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
so
you.
the scope of work identified in this contract is very specific to this grant. If you go, see where it is, attachment B, the budget, that gives you, that shows you where the dollars will be spent respective to the deliverables. And you see those detailed out. While we're already doing a housing plan, the opportunity to get these dollars and do a deeper dive and understand how those work is beneficial to us. We're waiting for commerce. We're still trying to understand how the ADU bill and the middle housing bill, how they all tie together. And I think we're hoping by February, we'll have a bit of an answer from commerce on how they all tie.
Okay. Council, what's your pleasure? It's been moved and seconded. Are we ready to take a vote?
Is this the vote on the three-touch rule or on the actual ordinance?
Just the three-touch rule.
Yeah, let's move on then. All those in favor of the suspending the three-touch tools rule signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any nays?
Nay.
Let the record show as the ayes 6-1, 4. That passes. Thank you, council, suspending the three-touch rule. Then on to the main question. What's your pleasure on? Mr. Furtoni?
Okay, now I will move resolution 24-1940, authorizing the mayor to accept the Department of Commerce Middle Housing Grant.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Council? Seeing no further discussion. All those in favor of adoption of resolution 24-1940, authorizing the mayor to accept the Department of Commerce Middle Housing Grant, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any nays? The ayes have it. It passes unanimously. Thank you very much, colleagues. That's very helpful. I'm always happy anytime we can get additional funds. So, and to our guest's point about the three-touch rule, I echo Mr. Goldman's sentiments there, and we need to do a better job of trying to make sure that we're using it only for things that are extremely time sensitive and opportunities and non-controversial. Thank you for your comments, Mr. Goldman. Next, we have item B, and this is with Mr. Sylvia. Andy, welcome. Resolution 24-1941, authorizing the mayor to execute the local and community projects program grant agreement number, I'm not even going to read the whole number, with the State Department of Commerce for the Town Center to Burke-Gilman Trail Connector Project. This is a happy one. Mr. Sylvia, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Happy New Year, everyone. Good to see you again. I am here to talk about this grant, and I wanted to just take a minute or two at most to provide new council members with just a basic primer of what the project overall is about before I get into those details. So the project is the product of a safe highway study that the city completed in 2018, aimed at identifying ways to make travel within the city's two main state highways, SR 104 and 522, safer for all users. And that was a consultant-led effort. One of the consultant's recommendations was a project to construct a grade-separated crossing for active transportation users, pedestrians and bicyclists across State Route 522, right out here in front of City Hall. And the city initiated a preliminary feasibility and design study in 2020, acting on that recommendation from the consultant. That's known as a type, size, and location study. I like to think of it as options analysis. You know, the idea being that you understand what you want to do. You're just, contemplating alternatives for accomplishing that goal. And there was another consultant-led effort. V&M Structural Design was our consultant. And as part of that study, the city contemplated several options for accomplishing that crossing of State Route 522. Ultimately narrowing choices down to two options, those being a tunnel connecting basically the City Hall property to the Burke-Gilman Trail right at the intersection of the two state highways. So that's an underground crossing, and then a second above grade crossing or bridge type structure about midway between the intersections of on 522 of the intersections with State Route 104 and Brookside Boulevard. So a mid-block crossing was the other alternative. And that was developed with input from numerous stakeholders, including council. And that process concluded in 2022, at which point the city sought and obtained a separate grant from the, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, that feasibility study was supported 100% by a grant from the Department of Commerce. And so city kind of liked that idea, tried it again in 2022, saw it and was successful in obtaining funding from the Department of Commerce for the next phase of that project, which is it's the 30% design of the preferred crossing option. And so what we're proposing to do is further evaluate the feasibility of those two preferred options, select one, and advance it to 30% design. We have at this point executed a contract with V&M Structural Design for that work. We have not authorized them to proceed yet with the work because we've been waiting for the execution of this grant to be ready, which is what I'm here tonight to talk to you about, or that's where we are in the process. So the new grant, like the previous grant, funds 100% of the project cost, the 30% design cost. There is no matching contribution. With due apology to the gentleman who offered the comments about the governance manual, I am also asking for council to consider suspending the three-touch rule in this case for a couple of reasons. One being that that, this, I referred to this sort of glancingly in the cover sheet, but the arrival of this, or the, getting to this point and the readiness of this grant for execution has taken longer than anybody would like, and kind of trying to stop the bleeding and the schedule delays for this project and advance it. And then secondly, the council did indicate its interest in advancing this work, granted a slightly different council last year in authorizing the award of the contract to V&M Structural Design for the work supported by this grant. So I hope it's a relatively uncontroversial suggestion to then execute the funding for it and proceed with the work. So.
Council, questions for Mr. Sylvia? Mr. Lebo was first. Yes.
Thank you for the
Councilman.
presentation. In looking at attachment A, scope of work, there's a provision in it that says this work is part of a larger project that is to be completed under separate funding. If the full project is not completed and put into service for the duration of the intended use period, Commerce reserves the right to recapture the funds or seek other remedies as allowed under this contract. I want to understand that the reference here to the part of a larger project is the actual project. And the reason I bring this up is I have been in a situation involved with federal funding that failure to complete the project, they asked for the money back.
Right, I struggled with this same notion in completing some of Commerce's pre-contracting materials. This reference to the project, which in this case refers to this 30% design effort, just bookended at the end of 30% design, versus what I referred to in these other Commerce documents as the larger, or I think I called it the overall project. And I know that my counterpart at Commerce understands the difference between the two, and that this grant is specifically for this this scope of work, this 30% design work. If that distinction could be made clearer in the draft, I guess that's something that I could ask them to consider, but.
That would be helpful to understand that the reference to the larger project is merely the scope of work associated with this grant, as opposed to development of a much larger project, such as an underpass or an overpass.
Yeah, I understand it. It's I can make that request of them. That's this is the language I've been given so far. So that's yeah, I would have to return to them to make that change.
Councilmember Riddle, you had a question?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify. So we have the consultant on contract waiting for the notice to proceed. So delaying approval of this would delay the start of their work by 2 weeks. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Colleagues, any questions? Councilmember Goldman, I saw you starting to raise your hand.
Yes, so I just want to make sure I understand the scope of work for the 30%. Is the goal that at the conclusion of this work, the 30%, we will have a definitive answer as to whether a tunnel is feasible with the soil that we have and what the costs of the tunnel would be versus the cost of the bridge?
Yes, yes, it is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Lebo.
This is maybe, I'm not entirely sure that I heard it correctly, but did Kenmore go through a similar exercise across Bothell Way to look at the feasibility of some other crossing than at grade?
I'm not familiar with their project.
If I may, on point, Mr. Lebo, I believe, I don't know about the feasibility study. I know they had aspirations to do that project right there by their town center
Yeah.
area and acquired parcels to that effect, but I don't, beyond that, I don't know. It's an interesting question. Thank you. I'm sorry, Councilmember Furton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Sylvia, for a great summary of the project. I'm kind of torn about this because on the one hand, as Councilmember Riddle pointed out, delay in approving these funds would delay the project. But I also am cognizant of Councilmember Lebo's point that, you know, the way that it's phrased right now, it sounds like they could come after us for the money if we don't complete the full project. And I know you have an understanding with the fella at the Department of Commerce, but what if he leaves, you know, and stuff like that? So I'm not in favor of advancing this until that language is significantly clearer. So, you know, I guess my question to you then is, what would a delay of until the next council meeting do to the time schedule of this project, apart from the fact that the work would be starting 2 weeks later? Is there anything waiting at the other end that this is dependent, that's dependent on this?
First, I want to, I guess, acknowledge that I don't know that how quickly I'll be able to return with the revised form of this agreement. That will be dependent on how quickly Commerce can turn around, you know, consider and hopefully accept a revision to this passage here. The funding, I believe there's and I'm sorry, I don't know offhand exactly where it is, but there's an acknowledgement in here about the funding being, you know, committed within the current state budget biennium, and that, I mean, I take it that that's kind of boilerplate language. Essentially, there's no guarantee if you extend your project past, you know, the deadline that is contemplated here, which is December 2024, that that funding will still be available. But you know, I don't think that, I mean, if Commerce can get us a revised agreement and we can begin this work within the next month or two, I mean, this work is supposed to take 7 months. That's what's in the consultant's contract scope, you know, start to finish. So we have almost 12 to, you know.
Before I start playing an attorney on TV, luckily we have one here. Ms. Pratt, you had your hand raised, and then I'll get to Deputy Mayor Bodie.
I did. So I just want to point out that project purpose is defined as the 30% design. And then that's in the agreement. It's page 118 in your packet. And then it says in the third whereas the project, so that would be the 30% design, capital P, is one component of a larger multi-phase project, small p. So I think they are making that distinction between this grant has been only for the 30% design. And it talks about grantee received appropriation of the 30% design. So from my legal point of view, I think it's clear, they've tried to make it clear that the project here is the 30% design.
Thank you, Ms. Pratt. Just one moment, Councilman Riddle. Deputy Mayor Bodie has her hand up. Lori?
Yes. Thank you very much. I must say that I would still rather see this clarified if it could be done expeditiously before we take action on this. And I would hope that we could get the Department of Commerce to agree to that clarification, because I would not want to be in a situation where we were arguing about this down the road. So I'd rather be safe than sorry. And I understand what our city attorney's saying. Probably that would be okay, but I'd rather do belt and suspenders here. And so I personally would encourage our Public Works Department to circle back and try to get a really quick, I mean, it should be a very simple clarification to that provision that would only require a few words of clarification. So that's my personal view, being cautious and wanting a little bit of extra clarification.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bodie. Councilman Riddle.
Thank you. Yeah, I as much as I appreciate our city attorney's view, I am also concerned in the scope of work. Part of a larger project is also a lowercase p. So And it does talk about if the full project is not completed and put into service. So I am also very concerned if we're not able to actually build something that this will come back and bite us in the end. So would love to see how quickly we can get it revised, especially since you have kind of a gentleman's agreement. Maybe this will be quicker than you may think.
Colleagues, any other questions or comments? Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you. I would be fine with just if they send you back an email and say, this is our interpretation. I don't know that we need to have them try and revise a standard commerce agreement. So from my perspective, I'd be okay with an interpretation from them. The other is, could you indulge me in it, consult with Ken Moore about what their plans were for some sort of separated grade crossing across Botham?
I can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lebo. Colleagues, so what I'm hearing is that we'll look at bringing this back. Thank you for your suggestion, Councilmember Lebo, about the email. I think that would be great. Thank you, Mr. Sylvia. Sure appreciate your presentation and your work on this.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And just as a side note, I'm working on trying to see if we might be able to find a secondhand overpass. There's a few floating around. Not easy to move, that's for sure. Let's see, where are we? We are item number C, Councilmember Attorney Pratt, ordinance 24-1286, amending chapter 2.30 of the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code Salary Commission to amend date reference for Salary Commission's first review of salaries benefits. That's a mouthful. Ms. Pratt, please.
Yes, so council, this is the second time this item is before you. And we have made the changes that are shown in the ordinance because the Salary Commission was not appointed in 2022. And we wanted to make sure that that didn't cause any confusion as to when they would take their next action. So we've eliminated the references to 2022 in the ordinance. So there's
Any questions for Attorney Pratt? We spoke about this in December, I believe. I'm
Yep.
sorry, I don't have my cover sheet
December.
open here. Okay, we'll bring that back to council for a third touch. Thank you very much, Ms. Pratt. And then we are, and it's been so long since we saw you.
Right.
Item D, ordinance 24-1288, amending chapter 9.060, firearms and dangerous weapons. Please.
Council, in your current chapter 9.06, you regulate so that no weapons, including firearms, are allowed in the municipal courtroom. The legislature in 2023 is now allowing cities to prohibit open carry in buildings where you conduct public meetings. So this ordinance would prohibit the open carry in the city hall building. And it has the same penalty as in state statute, which it would be a misdemeanor on the first offense and a gross misdemeanor on the second offense. And there are also, you'll see changes in the ordinance itself where we've not clarified, but changed around the penalties for the other provisions in 906. They are gross misdemeanors. We've left them gross misdemeanors, just moved it around a little bit. Any questions?
Colleagues, any questions for Ms. Pratt? And colleagues, as sponsor of this item from previous year, I wanted, well, it's not from previous year, excuse me, this year. We talked about it independently last year to bring it to council this year, excuse me. I believe that this is a housekeeping item to bring us up to standards within the state, and it's allowed for the safety of the public. And I'm asking for suspension of the 3-touch rule to move this forward for the good of the community. Deputy Mayor Bodie.
Just a question. This is our second touch, is that correct?
Yes, council did get their first touch in the work session that you had earlier this
Right.
evening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Colleagues, any other questions? Would you be amenable to suspending the 3-touch rule in this case? Deputy Mayor Bodie.
Yes, I think that this is a matter of conforming our laws. And it is an important element for public safety. And once again, I echo my colleagues. I am not generally in favor of suspending the three-touch rules. But I believe in this case, it is important to get this work done. And the changes are conforming changes, again, in the mode of housekeeping. There isn't anything hugely controversial or of great public interest here. This is really a conforming provision, but it is something connected to public safety. So I, for one, would be in favor of suspending the three-touch rule, but I would defer to the consensus of the group.
Colleagues, Councilmember Furtoni.
Well, let's put it to the question then. So I move that we suspend the three-touch rule on ordinance 24-1288.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion to suspend the three-touch rule regarding ordinance 24-1288, amending chapter 9.006? Hearing no further discussion, all those in. Oh, yeah.
So again, just to address the concern about suspending the three-touch rule so much. As a council member or Deputy Mayor Bodie said, this is a matter of conforming to state law. And I think we're going to have some fairly crowded agendas coming up very soon. So the more we punt effectively these housekeeping measures further into the year, the more crowded our agendas are going to get. And we're going to need all the brain space we have to actually consider these much more difficult pieces of legislation. So that's why I'm in favor of this particular thing to suspend the three-touch rule.
Thank you, council member. Any other comments on the suspending the three-touch rule? All those in favor of suspending a three-touch rule signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any nays? The ayes have it. That passes unanimously. I'd entertain a motion to approve ordinance 24-1288. Mr. Councilmember Furtoni.
All right, I'm moving ordinance 24-1288, amending chapter 9.06 firearms and dangerous weapons.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? I would just say, as sponsor of this, I'd like to say thank you very much, colleagues, that this is important. I was completely unaware that this was allowed previously, and I'd be happy to have a sidebar with any of you about my reasons for my concern. And with that, all those in favor of approval of ordinance 24-1288, amending chapter 9.06 firearms and dangerous weapons, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any nays? The ayes pass unanimously. Thank you, colleagues, for helping protect our community. And we're moving on to item 9, council discussion and action. We have 2 additional items that were added. Councilmember Riddle has requested the governance manual amendment that she is proposing be brought to the mix here. And as I indicated earlier, the state law states that we have to adopt our council, or you have to adopt your council rules. So that's why we couldn't amend it prior to adoption. So you could, it's a circular thing. I'll leave it there.
We're fine.
And Councilmember Riddle, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you, Mayor. I think we have some new council members on board, and while I think our liaison description has pretty much followed this to a T in the past, we've never actually kind of brought it in as a policy and a part of our governance manual. And I feel like it's a bit of housekeeping to put into words what our expectations are as they have been in the past. I don't think this is a deviation from what we expect a liaison to do. So I'm hoping that my colleagues will entertain this amendment this evening.
Thank you, Councilmember. Colleagues, discussion on this topic. You received it as part of an email. I hope you had a chance to review it. Councilmember Furtoni.
Hi, thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Riddle, for basically bringing this to our attention. One of the questions I had was, we've been working on the governance manual for quite some time, and I'm just wondering, was there some precipitating event or some action that caused you to think about this over the past month or so and bring it to our attention now?
Yes, actually, there's been some concerns raised by some commission members that there's been some extra involvement by a liaison that has put them into a challenging position. So I did start with that and found this from, I believe it's Brandage Island, and it works for them. So I thought it would be a really easy add to bring to us today.
Colleagues, any other questions on Councilmember Riddle's amendment? Councilmember Lebo.
So I have two thoughts on this. One is that liaison, one way to think of this is that there's sort of an accepted term or definition to liaison as common practice. And that we wouldn't necessarily go into a lot of extended detail to describe what otherwise could be considered an accepted practice by common definition. And that as governance manuals, that the brevity is oftentimes preferential. If it's the desire of the council to adopt such language, I would encourage that we look for brevity and that there may be an opportunity to edit. As once said, I would have written a shorter letter had I had more time.
Thank you, Councilmember Lebo. Losing my voice here. Councilmember Goldman, there we go.
Yeah,
Wasn't
thanks.
getting well.
And thank you, Councilmember Riddle, for bringing this to us. I'm broadly supportive of it. I remember 2 years ago, I had just joined the council and I had just been appointed as the liaison to the tree board. And while I had gotten some general mentorship from current council members, and I had a really nice Zoom chat with the then current chair of the tree board, there was still a lot of sort of uncertainty in my mind as to how exactly what I should be doing in this meeting, how much I should be speaking up, how much I should just be a neutral conduit for information. And so I'm supportive of having this explicitly because the nature of the governance manual is it's not just for us right now. It's meant to be a blueprint for future councils, especially when there's people coming in brand new who don't have that institutional knowledge. So I'm supportive of having this there explicitly.
Thank you, Councilmember. Colleagues, other thoughts? Councilmember Furtoni.
I wanted to make sure everybody had a chance.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Councilmember Bodie. I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor Bodie. My apologies.
Yes, no problem. I have trouble with the transition myself. I think that this language requires more consideration, discussion, and massaging. I do agree with Councilmember Lebo that it is more detailed than I would like to see. I also think there are some substantive issues with it. For example, the Planning Commission is an entity with independent status under state law, and they can bring their own, they can bring their own agenda to us. For example, the reasonable use exception provisions that we recently adopted were not part of the council-oriented work plan, but was a matter that the Planning Commission itself identified and decided to make a recommendation on. And in fact, we accepted it and acted on it. So I would simply say, good point. Let's discuss it and not adopt it tonight, but let it percolate a little bit and see what we want to do with the language. And then a second question I have is, do we have other, we just finished the update of the governance manual. So is there, should we, I thought we talked about this a little bit of having like a catch-all time frame for when we would make updates to the governance manual. But perhaps I'm mistaken and it was some other document. So is there a parking lot where periodically we want to look at changes to the governance manual? So again, I'm broadly in support like Councilmember Goldman. I think we could use some massaging and accuracy when it comes to the Planning Commission per Councilmember Lebo's suggestion. And then my third comment is procedural, which is, do we want to have a parking lot and take those matters up in the future? So again, I welcome the input of my colleagues. Those are just my broad thoughts, having listened to the rest of you and considered where we should go with this.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, Councilmember Riddle.
Yes, I guess if I could address the timing, if I had thought about this earlier, I would have brought it during the time that we were working through the issues as a group. It's just that the concerns from the commission didn't happen till late in the year. And so that's where the timing is coming from. So I think listening to our planning commissioners and understanding where they're coming from, I think it's important for us to reiterate these rules. I think it does speak to in this case, they call it committee in this document, but the committee commission taking action that has worked within the scope of the committee's work. I think that reasonable use exception falls directly under that and would allow them to do that. So I don't think this would disallow any of the work that they've been doing thus far. I just feel like it's great to get it in writing for our new council members. And if they were to, knowing that you're expecting to come off a couple of boards and they're hoping we can get one of our new council members to engage with the boards. I just want them to have all the full information that they can to be successful at their role.
Councilmember Furtani.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm broadly in favor of this as well. I think this is one of those additions. Remember, we've been trying in our governance manual to put sort of an explanatory statement or preface to the different sections to explain why we thought that way at the particular time we thought it. I think in this one, what you're trying to address, I suspect, is something like the power dynamic between a sitting council member and basically the commission or committee itself. And I think if we're explicit about that, then I think it's much clearer why we say these definitions the way we say them. So that's something I'd like you to consider in perhaps the revision of this.
If I could, I believe item 2 kind of deals with that. It's that the liaison is acting a representative of the full council and has no authority to provide any direction or guidance to the committee other than direction or guidance that clearly represents the direction and guidance of the full council. So if they were to come in with their own interpretations, their own opinions, then I think that is where it gives one council member out of balance influence on a commission rather than representing the decisions of the entire group and the whole body of the council. So I felt like 2 covered that. I'm totally open if you don't feel like that is encompassing what your concern is.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I appreciate your trying to address my concern that way. That is part of it. And the other part of it is just literally that if the idea is to not make it's we don't have staff, of course. It's to basically not make a committee a council member's unpaid staff, right? I think that's part of the issue as well. So I think if we're explicit about that, then people say, okay, I'm not supposed to do this, and hopefully they'd be self-limiting in that too. I think the definitions are super important, but our motivations are also equally important, I think.
Colleagues, this is one of those. Are there any other comments? This is one of those places where I would be happy to weigh in with a suggestion, but I would leave that to your council leadership, Mr. Furtani and Deputy Mayor, about how you would like to consider timeframe, et cetera. And maybe the 3 of you would like to work together on considering this, as well as I certainly appreciate Councilmember Bodie as relative to the question of the parking lot, whatever we're calling that. I think that there are some other things that may be out there. Right.
Yeah, and I kind of object to the calling it a parking lot because as we all know, we've been on enough committees. Parking lot basically we'll never see it again, right? Okay, and I don't want that to happen.
That's a technical thing. I apologize, Mr. Furtani.
So
that's what we call it.
So yeah, and we could wait until we revise the council manual, the governance manual again, but that's not going to be for at least a year. So I think if I'm willing to commit to a timeline that it comes within the next couple of meetings, and hopefully we'll be able to take care of it at that point.
That also sounds very good to me.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councilmember Riddle.
I'm encouraged and will work with the leadership to get this in the next few meetings.
Thank you, Councilmember Riddle. I look forward to it. I appreciate the discussion. It's really important. Okay, where are we in the mix here? Oh, yes, we're,
The other thing.
9B.
9B.
Yep.
Yes, and what was 9B again? We
Boards
moved.
and commissions.
Oh, boards and, yeah, approving boards and commissions. Thank you. Yes. I would entertain a motion to approve the boards and commission members as discussed in the council work session. I would prefer not to have to read the entire list. Mr. McLean has the entire list.
Is the city clerk able to put the list up for us to review for this approval? He is working on that. I think we should just
Thank
need to give
you.
him a moment.
Or I can have a substitute read for me. I appreciate that.
There we go.
Much appreciated, Matt.
You would take a moment if we can, there we go. And we'll start with city boards and commissions. Any errors or omissions here, council? Okay. Should we move on to Sound Cities? Please check for accuracy. Any concerns? Okay, let's move on to other. This is a big one, so give it a little bit more time. And to our new colleagues that have joined us, we certainly don't expect you to understand what each of these are. Please reach out and ask any one of us. There are people way more versed in some of these than I, so capitalize on their skills, please. I'm squinting too. I might have to borrow your glasses. Realization. I mean, I can't, well, I can sort of read it on that screen. That's easier. Okay. Anyone have any concerns or questions? With that, I'd entertain a motion to adopt the list as amended.
I move that we adopt the list as amended for members of boards and commissions.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt the amended boards and commissions list. Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Riddle.
I just want to thank my colleagues for being so involved in our community and stepping up and volunteering in these roles. I think it's critical for us as a small city to be regional, and that's how we make our successes. So stepping up and giving your time to these regional boards is really critical to our success as a city. So thank you all, colleagues, very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Furtoni.
And to echo Councilmember Riddle's sentiment, in fact, members of our community have been asking us to, as a city council, to work with neighboring municipalities in forming these, for instance, racer-like organizations that address needs that we have that we can't fund ourselves.
Thank you, Mr. Furtoni. Any other comments on point? With that, all those in favor of adopting the amended list of boards and commission liaisons, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any nays? The ayes have it. It passes unanimously. Thank you for your willingness to volunteer, everyone. This is really important work. Okay, we're moving on. Is there any other, are there any other items of other business? There we go. Okay, seeing none, we're moving on to item 11. Council committee reports. Are there any council committee reports? I don't believe we've had any council committees. Council members reports. Councilmember Riddle.
It's been a slow start to the years. I've had one meeting. The North King County Coalition on Homelessness met this afternoon, and a couple of funding opportunities came up, and I think it'd be interesting for us to see at least, also with our neighbors, if they're interested in these funding opportunities, and see if we can't support these services in larger regional efforts. So there's the Veterans and Human Services funding that'll start this month. And then there is a Healthcare for the Homeless Network funding, which RFP will open on 2/2. So quick start to the year in opportunities to find funding. And then another piece that came up is looking at sort of trends in homelessness, and they're seeing a increase in a of people who are living in their cars, homeless folks living in their cars. And as we go into winter, those folks sometimes are challenged to go to shelters because they don't want to leave their stuff in the car unattended. So it's a population that is being looked at by the human service providers in the area, but it is a growing population and is a growing concern. That's what we talked about today.
Thank you, Councilmember Riddle. Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, thank you. I've attended 2 meetings last week. The first was the tree board meeting. There were 2 new members of the tree board, so thank you for approving them. We also have 1 member who resigned, so there is still a vacancy on the tree board. Maybe at some point we'll eventually be fully staffed. The bulk of the meeting was talking about the tree inventory report. The plan is for, I believe, watershed and tree board members to come to the second meeting in February to report that to the council. That meeting will be sort of the big picture, how is our canopy? And then the tree board is eager to take a look at the raw data and start making some specific recommendations about exceptional tree diameters that will be coming later in the year likely. In addition, they're also interested in taking a look at our general tree list and in particular, modernizing it and also considering if we should also have a prohibited tree list. Currently, we have a recommended tree list, but are there some taking from Washington State, King County, their list of noxious weeds and trees to better inform the public about what they should not be planting, not just what they should be planting. So that's the tree board. Seashore also met last week. I was elected as a co-chair along with Shoreline Council member Eben Poby. So we'll be co-chairing Seashore this year. The bulk of what we talked about was just sort of planning our agenda, what sort of topics people are interested in hearing about, which I'll be reporting to you as we go. So that's what I did last week.
Thank you, Councilmember Goldman. Colleagues, any other councilmember reports? Councilmember Furtoni.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I attended the Climate Action Committee's meeting, and we'll all be seeing the Climate Action Plan for Lake Forest Park, hopefully sometime in the March timeframe. There'll be some significant recommendations in them, and so they wanted to kind of prep us on that. The other thing is that I really want to commend the chair, Sarah Phillips, for reaching out to the other boards and commissions we have in the city. I know she's been attending the Planning Commission meeting in the context of the climate emphasis that the comp plan is going to have. She's also intending to attend both the tree board and the Parks and Rec board as well. So I think this could be a model of basically how we can have our committees start to work with each other, because after all, we're all trying to vaguely head for the same goal. And the idea that the more the commissions know about each other, the less redundancy and even contradiction that we could avoid. So really wanted to call that out.
Thank you, Councilmember Furtoni. Deputy Mayor Bodie. Oops, you're muted, Lori. There you go.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I was pulling up another screen and I didn't unmute myself. So a couple of things. First of all, for those of you who may not have followed the changes in Sound Transit, despite the fact that Councilmember Fortani and I recommended that we have a Sound Transit board member from Lake Forest Park, and we made compelling arguments, I believe. The chair of the Sound Transit Board selected 3 new board members, and it did not include, sadly, Lake Forest Park. I think there is a representative from Seattle, a representative from King County Council, and the mayor of Redmond, whom our mayor has good working relationships with. So by my estimate, there really isn't much representation from the North End if you look at the whole Sound Transit board, because Shoreline is not represented, we're not represented, Kenmore is not represented, I believe Bothell, Woodinville. So it does seem to be a gap, but I do understand that Redmond has a lot of Sound Transit work coming their way. So just to give you that update, and there is currently an interim CEO because CEO Julie Tim, who met with us a couple of times in Lake Forest Park, has stepped down. So those updates, and for those of you who may not have heard those. The Planning Commission had a meeting this week also. And thank you to Sarah Phillips from the Climate Action Committee for attending. I think that there was a very good point made that we need to integrate the Climate Action Plan that's coming out soon with the climate action goals and policies that our consultant for the comprehensive plan our consultant is working on those provisions. So we do need to marry those up. And in addition, looking down the road, there is going to be potentially an additional grant that we receive for the comp plan for climate related work. And so it will be important to have that coordinated as well with the Climate Action Committee. So just a little bit of a follow-up on Councilmember Fortani's comments. I think that exactly how that's going to work is not that clear, but I do think that you know, by making sure that the commissioners and the committee members integrate together, we'll make sure there aren't any disconnects. There was a representative in the public comment space from the master builders who made a brief comment about the different zoning designations, density, and middle housing. It did seem to be kind of a standard opening speech, you know, kind of a to get started and provide their general perspective. So I thought that was interesting. There were no other members of the public who commented. Let's see. Right now they were working on that. I may have mentioned to you before that analytic documents have been prepared by the consultants that support the comprehensive plan. And those are largely completed at this point. The overview of the city of Lake Forest Park and the housing assessment, those are technical documents with a lot of data, demographics, geographic, and those are largely completed. But now the Planning Commission is starting to work on actual language of the comprehensive plan. And this week they took up the land use language, including what the new zoning designations might be in light of the new state legislation that eliminates single family zoning. Next, they're going to take up environmental quality and climate goals. And because there is just a lot that needs to be done, they're going to start meeting twice a month. So it was a very dynamic, exciting meeting. And the agendas going forward are going to be very meaty, I think. And in addition, I would say our new community development director was able to attend, and that was a great development. So anyway, just a little too much information, but there's a lot going on there.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bodie. Colleagues, any other council member reports? Making sure we're not missing anything here. The mayor's report, a couple of topics really briefly here. I'm pleased to let you know, if you haven't heard, Mayor Herbig has been re-upped, so to speak, reappointed by the Kenmore City Council as mayor. And we have a very positive working relationship with Nigel. He's a very dynamic and represents Kenmore exceptionally well. As well as Chris Roberts, who previously served as mayor and deputy mayor a number of years ago, has been elected by his council as mayor of Shoreline. And I serve with Chris Roberts on the Sound Cities PIC, and we also have a fantastic working relationship with him. And there's some new council members in both cities, and we all should try to get to know them, and we will be trying to find a time for a joint council meeting, maybe separately with Shoreline and separately with Kenmore in the very near future, so we can get to know each other and talk about issues of common success. We have lots of things for us to be working on together to ensure that we get funding for the various capital projects we have, stormwater, et cetera. I'm very pleased that Shoreline is now seemingly very engaged in the Lake Ballinger Forum that Councilmember Furtani and I attended on Tuesday. Let's see, a couple other things. Councilmember Furtani, I guess you didn't mention this. I met with Chair Phillips, with Sarah Phillips and Councilmember Furtani from the Climate Action Committee earlier this week and had a very robust conversation about the upcoming report that's coming out. The group has very graciously created a draft of an introductory letter from the mayor's office that I've reviewed and looking forward to seeing the final product so we can incorporate some of those sentiments into the mix. It's very considerate of them to do that. Let's see, lots of other things going on. But we'll save some of these things for later. I do want to say that it is a real pleasure to have worked with so many of you in a policymaker capacity, and it's a pleasure to welcome our new colleagues here to the dais. When you go home tonight, take a deep breath.
Have a drink.
Watch whatever, binge watch whatever you find entertaining on TV or read a good book or something. And I know from my standpoint, it tends to take me a couple hours to kind of turn off my brain after all the things we're thinking about. And as always, if there's anything that you need, any of you, please reach out. In my new role, sometimes it's going to be difficult for me to let go of some of the policy side of things. And so a very good friend of mine said, I need to mourn the loss of my policymaking side. So we'll see how that goes. In our form of government, I don't have to mourn all of it, but part of it. And so with that, we have Mr. Hill's city administrator report, and we have some positive news to share.
I do. Build me up, thanks. So we have received notice from WashDOT that they're willing to reduce the speed limit on Ballinger Way between 35th Avenue Northeast and the shoreline border to 35 miles an hour effective very soon. They asked for concurrence from the Washington State Patrol as well as our police chief. Both have given concurrence, so that will be taking place now. On 522 Bothell Way, we have had Transpo Group complete their review of what WashDOT had submitted and given us reason why they can't lower the speed limit to 35 miles an hour on 522. And as we suspected, Transpo Group found exactly the opposite, that it does warrant at this time to be reduced to 35 miles per hour. I have requested and sent a letter to WashDOT. I CC'd the council members who have been communicating directly with WashDOT in this effort, giving them a copy of that study as well and the findings, and requesting a meeting with their staff, Mr. Nielsen, myself, and our staff and consulting engineers to discuss reducing that speed limit to 35 miles per hour now as well. And then I want to back up real quick on Ballinger Way. They will also consider in the future even possibly a slower speed limit after they do their work in 26, 27, because they are required to do complete streets. They will then look at the context of the road. I know we're looking at maybe a 30 mile per hour speed limit there, so they'll be willing to consider that in that context at that time. So some good news on 104, and now we have the information we assumed we would get out of Transpo Group. We are still, to Councilmember Lebo's request from the last meeting, we have requested that a scope of work and fee be put together, and we'll be bringing that to you when we have that and have analyzed that from Transpo Group as well to do our own study and traffic counts, speed, etc. And other than that, the rest is in your CA report this week.
Any questions for Mr. Hill on the Deputy Mayor Bodie?
I just wanted to say that is really great progress in a very short period of time. And so I greatly appreciate it because I know there's a certain amount of time and heavy lifting involved. So I'm just very excited about that. And, thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. One last item I wanted to say, actually two last items. I wanted to give a shout out to our PD and the chief. They've had some challenges that they've had to deal with, and they've done admirably, very professionally, given the limitations that they have under state statutes, under the pursuit laws, et cetera. And many thanks, Chief, to your team for doing all those, taking care of all those incidents, including apprehending a suspect. Deputy Mayor Bodie. Do you have another comment? Yes. No, okay. Just checking. And with that, it comes to one of my favorite parts of when we have a new council, the time honored tradition that the new council members get to sing the Star Spangled Banner. So Paula, you have the mic. Oh, wait a minute. Is that our tradition? I forgot. No, it's not our tradition. With that, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, we're adjourned.
I was in that audience when you